So I thought I'd start with a story. I used to live in Atlanta, and in 2005, I was a pastry chef at a restaurant called Bacchanalia. And I noticed that all of our food was coming in, the farmers were actually coming into the restaurant to deliver our stuff. We weren't going to any farmers markets to pick up the stuff. And so I was kind of curious, and growing up in LA, going to the farmers markets with my mom, I wanted to know where they were so I could go also. And one of the chefs said, there's this amazing place, it's called the DeKalb Farmers Market. And I was so excited, and I went, and it looked like that. A world market full of spices from around the world, grains from around the world, and a bunch of produce from everywhere. And it was incredibly interesting as a cook to see all of these products, but it wasn't what I was looking for. So I started going over to the produce section, and I noticed that there was peanuts from Georgia, and there were collards from Georgia. But about 85% of the rest of the stuff was actually from California. Even the peaches were from California. We actually are the #1 grower of peaches. And though I didn't know it then, that was the genesis of what I do now. I'm Jessica. I own SQIRL, which is a preserve company and now a restaurant in Los Angeles. SQIRL started as an obsession with California produce and took into account my experience in the South. It made a lot of sense after seeing the DeKalb market why it was so important for chefs to preserve everything, to make pickles, to do charcuterie, to break down full hogs. Because they just didn't have the access to the amount of produce that we had. And so it became an obsession of mine to kind of do that here, where the amount of produce was so great. California sends about 60% of their produce to the rest of the US, and the rest of it is here. But the kind of stuff that they ship are things that have been basically made to last on shelves, to take long transit trips, and they're not really the type of fruit that was grown here in the 50s and the 40s, the product of a great botanist named Luther Burbank. And something like the Blenheim apricot that was once the largest apricot grown in California is now grown by 2 farmers here in California. And it was my desire to find these farmers and to squirrel it away for later. And the same thing happened, it really happened organically with the restaurant, where I realized I had this space and that it was time to open my doors and say, this is who I am, and allow people to come in. But I wanted it to be a place where anyone from 5 to 95 could find something that they wanted to eat. But it was cooked by trained chefs that all come from maybe a fine dining background, that have that drive to find those farmers and to use that produce. So, you know, we do goose egg quiches with morels, and toast and jam with Blenheim apricot. I don't think you'll find that anywhere else, definitely in Southern or Central California. So while I can talk to you about why SQIRL is emotionally and creatively satisfying to me, I also want to talk about some lessons that I've learned just in the kitchen, as well as just creating a business that I think can relate to anyone here today. Play with your food. I'm sure your parents always told you, don't play with your food, but play with it. And what I mean is on a macro level and on a micro level. And on a macro level, I guess what I'm trying to say is, maybe what you're doing right now isn't what you're going to do. Maybe you're doing 10 things. After I was a pastry chef, I moved to New York and became a producer for American Idol. I was not in my profession at all. If I sat here and said that I did this pastry chef my entire life, that's not true. But what I learned was how to work within a team. I learned about deadlines. I learned about clients. I learned about how to create things within the framework that's been given to me. And those are really valuable lessons that I took away from that profession. And so whether you're a photographer, you're a graphic designer, you write about fashion, but you're not really quite sure where all this is going to end up, it'll end up because you're getting yourself there. And on a micro level, really play with your food. In the kitchen last week, we had some extra squid ink. And typically that's put into pasta, al nero di sepia. And a lot of times it's used in vongole, like a pasta with clams. But here we were like, oh, we have some masa, we have squid ink, and we made squid ink tacos with halibut. And it was like a taco version of the vongole, and it was so interesting. And those are the moments you live for. I mean, there's also times that I fail, where I use a fruit that I think is really interesting, but texturally it doesn't hold up. But you have to be willing to make those risks and play around, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it all lends itself to the goal. Trust your palate. Through all this playfulness, you're going to start trusting your palate. You're going to start to see your own perspective, because all of these things that you've done, all these things that I've done have helped to create what I think is true. And it's very unique, and it's only to you. Taste can't be learned, it's developed. There's a book called The Flavor Bible, and I believe in the idea that you have to learn the rules before you can break it. So you can take something like this, The Flavor Bible, and you can learn that pork goes well with Coca-Cola, goes well with cinnamon. But then how do you expand upon that? This is just step one. So trusting your palate can lend you to something like this. There's a jam I make called, it's blueberry with tarragon. And tarragon is not a liked flavor by a lot of people. And it's actually, I'd say, in our top 4 best-selling jams. You're not going to find blueberry and tarragon as a mix in the Flavor Bible. It doesn't exist. But it felt right. And I've had amazing result just by saying it feels right to me. Put the right cooks in the kitchen. So it might not be the Swedish chef. I'm so into the Muppets right now, by the way. It might not be the Swedish chef, but the best way I can describe it is getting a band together. Knowing who you are and what your role is, and delegating to other people, and getting the right people in to lift you up and lift each person up together. The banjo is important, the triangle is important, and it's really good to know, especially for me, where I am great and where I need help. And I feel like at SQIRL we have an amazing band, an amazing group of people who are passionate about what they do, and I can trust their palates as well. And we all share a similar idea, and maybe it differs a little bit, but we're walking the same line. And you can feel it at a restaurant when you order, when the vibe is good and you sit down and the food comes out quickly, and there's something going on in the kitchen that's like a magical moment. There's some music playing. And then sometimes if your food takes forever, you don't know what's going on. Maybe a ticket was lost, a chef is out of town, and you really feel it. You feel the notes are being missed. So get your band, and hopefully you can be the Dudamel of your band. Keep it fresh. And this goes for everything from ingredients to exterior, both inside and outside. I think about what's fresh to SQIRL in terms of the food, but I also think about what's fresh to SQIRL in terms of the product, the image, the packaging, and how it all lends itself together. The ingredients do matter. And again, that leads back to not just the ingredients themselves, tangible, but like my designer, my chef, So the question for me in keeping it fresh was, how do I take something like Smucker's, which has become common and we all know it, and how do I let people know that SQIRL exists? Jam has been around since the 13th century. We've been doing it in copper pots since then. stirring it by hand. What makes SQIRL new and different and innovative? And how do I get away? And Smucker's was probably innovative in the 60s when pectin, commercial pectin, started being sold across the world, and it allowed for this kind of gel set. And so now I have to get people back to the idea that maybe that gel set isn't natural, it isn't right. So I've had a two-pronged issue, trying to get people to get it on a textural level and also on a product level. So this is what we came up with, SQIRL. And part of the success really not only is inside, trusting my palate to create something interesting, flavorful, textural, but exterior. I will always live with the spelling of SQIRL. My designer thought that it looked font-wise more interesting on a jar than the actual spelling. And thanks to him, I will live with this. And I think it's beautiful, and it's become kind of an object. I think, it's become an object. And who knows if keeping it fresh means changing the look of this in 10, 20 years. But I'm open to that exploration, and I think it's always a good idea to be open to exploration. And finally, tend the pilot light. At my kitchen, the stove, it burns brightly during the day. It burns really low at night. It always keeps the oven hot, but it needs to be tended. Sorry. There's some days where I go home and I don't want to get out of bed. I read a bad Yelp review or something happens in the kitchen, but that pilot light doesn't go out for me. I always feel the desire to do more, be better, and for me, that's the difference between occupation and vocation. Occupation in Latin is to take or to seize. You think about it, it's like taking your time, taking one's time up, versus vocation, which is to call or to summons. And for me, you answer to it. You answer to that vocation. And I'm not sure how I answered the call to jam making, but I did. Maybe it was lit in the world market in Georgia, where I followed the peaches back to California. And since then, it's been jam. Thank you.